And we're live.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Transportation and the Environment Subcommittee on Appropriations briefing on using telework as a tool to mitigate traffic congestion and pollution. I hope everyone's doing well. Let me just say at the top that telework's obviously not new, but it's also obviously having a big moment right now. And big technological changes have probably altered how we can use telework. I'd say even as recently as 5 years ago, we couldn't have been productive from home as we are now. We couldn't do these briefings from home as we are now. And that's even with many of us having childcare issues in the house. We're still able to be pretty productive. I think prior to the pandemic, the DC region, which includes obviously suburban Maryland, had about 10% telework or work from home. Baltimore region was lower, about 5%. Part of that reflects job types and classifications, but telework is already, and work from home has already been a part of our sort of commuting equation even before all this. And we've started to see a significant return of commuters as the toughest lockdowns have eased, which is good that the lockdowns have eased, but traffic is still mostly free flowing, at least in terms of congestion related traffic. Obviously, we still have maintenance issues, car accidents. In fact, car accidents by some measures have gotten worse because of the lack of congestion, ironically. One data point for this, I saw Transurban announce yesterday that the I-485 express lanes in Virginia were down about 50% in July 2020 compared to July 2019. Even though overall traffic is no longer down nearly that much because traffic is flowing more freely, less people are incentivized to use the toll lanes. And of course, all this leads to some pretty significant questions. And I'll be honest, some of them are pretty uncomfortable, even for someone like me who advocates for things like transit. So first, should we be promoting telework because it eases congestion and it's more cost effective and probably better for the environment than long haul commutes? Virginia, for example, has a telework tax credit, although like the toll roads in Virginia, it hasn't cured all their traffic issues in a non-pandemic situation. Does telework even need promotion, or will the change occur naturally? We saw yesterday in Maryland, a couple of our newsrooms are permanently closed. REI announced that they're going to abandon their corporate campus and lean into telework, all without any kind of government incentive. What's the amount of single car traffic we'd need to shift off the road or out of peak hours to keep traffic flowing? What would the implications be for the Transportation Trust Fund revenue if less people are commuting long distances by car? What does it mean for transit and urban spaces if larger groups of people shift to telework and a decentralized model of work? And of course, we have to acknowledge that many jobs can't telework now or ever. According to the Baltimore MPO, I think about 42% of Baltimore area jobs could, in theory, telework. And that lack of options for 58% of jobs, does that create equity issues, particularly if it involves government incentives for telework? I would just say the current pandemic-induced telework is not what anybody wants. I think the question is, what can we learn from it and maybe adjust based on this moment? We're joined by the full committee chair, and I want to give her a chance to say anything up top if she has any comments. Madam Chair. Madam Chair, you're on mute. I'm not sure if you're trying to talk or not.
There. Thank you very much. First of all, it's great to see everyone. And I think this is a very important issue that is being raised by this subcommittee. And I'm very pleased to see the panel that's going to be with us today to cover this topic. I thank the subcommittee chair. I thank the vice chair for raising this issue and bringing it to us and asking us to really focus on this at this point in time. So all I have to do is to thank you for all your hard work, and I'm here to listen very closely to this discussion. Thanks for your oversight.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do want to particularly recognize the subcommittee vice chair who's really been out pushing this issue. Vice Chair Krim, anything you want to add up the top here? Madam Vice Chair.
I was just trying to unmute myself. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm so happy to hear that the Appropriations Committee Chair is with us today. Yes, this is a very important topic. I come from an area in Frederick County where commuting is a daily nightmare for people when we were in the pre-pandemic era. We're in a new era now, and there are opportunities that we need to explore. I want to thank everybody here for coming and for participating. I think everybody on the agenda will have some very important information for us today. And Mr. Chairman, before we get started, I just want to know, do you want everybody to present their information before we ask questions, or ask questions as we go?
I think we'll do it as panels. So with that, I'll actually go ahead and introduce the panels unless there was anything else, Vice Chair.
That's all. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. And thanks again for really pushing this. I think Secretary Slater may be having some difficulties with the mute, Matt, if you just want to take a quick look at that. But we'll start this afternoon with the Secretary of Transportation, Greg Slater, if he's able to unmute, and the Secretary of Environment, Ben Grumbles. From there, we'll move on to the Maryland Transportation Institute at the University of Maryland. And then we also have some speakers from two of our metropolitan planning organizations, the DC region and Baltimore. Just a reminder to my colleagues, if you want to ask a question, please use the raise hand function in the participants option at the bottom of the screen. And then for those speaking, I believe there are some slide decks. Just make sure you're alerting the staff when you want the slide change. So with that, let me turn it over to the secretaries. And if Secretary Slater can't speak yet, we can always, of course, start with Secretary Grumble.
Great. Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Great. We resolved the issue. First, let me say a big thank you to Chairman Corman, Vice Chair Krim, members of the committee, of course, Chairman McIntosh for taking time with us today. As I look at this panel, I can't tell you how much I love having a panel full of planners and data people. It's right in my wheelhouse. So great to have me here. Great to have everyone here today. MDOT is glad to have a seat at the table and really kind of be part of this dialogue as we're looking at trends, what we're seeing across our system, and what we see our system as a result of COVID-19. So we have, the pre-COVID traffic, we have the pandemic, and then, trying to understand what that post-COVID traffic would be. I think there's one more slide in there that should be up while we're doing this. It's great. There we go. Let me first talk a little bit about how COVID has impacted our system. In your July letter, you touched upon a couple of national travel trends on the system, on the MDOT system, some specifically along corridors in the National Capital Region. I think it's important to talk about some of the trends we're seeing across the department, across the business units, and I'll run through them pretty quickly. All of the trends that you see up on your screen, we've been putting them up on our MDOT website weekly as we update those really kind of live, and as we're getting that and trying to look at the recovery. From a travel trend perspective, our roadway traffic, our vehicular traffic was down at its peak in mid-April when it was about 52% compared to last year. As of last week, the traffic was down a little bit under 20% compared to last year. So we're starting to see a little bit of that recovery. Over at MDTA, the tolling authority saw similar declines, but has rebounded down to being down about 23% in the last week. One thing that we're noticing is that while we're seeing traffic volumes return, they aren't necessarily returning evenly across that 24-hour period. So what we're seeing is, in some areas, we're seeing our morning peak spread out over a longer period with minimal congestion, where we're getting back to a little bit of a congested condition in the afternoon. And I think there's a variety of theories on what that is, and maybe it has to do with schools and start times and work trips versus non-work trips and those types of things. But we're really looking at that carefully. Truck traffic has also declined a little bit, but not as significantly as total volumes. In mid-April, we were down about 26% of truck traffic, but that supply chain moving has really kept that going. Last week, we were down at 3%, but we see an increase in kind of that smaller freight, those Amazon type facilities, those truck overhead long delivery, those types of things. On the air side, travel through BWI Marshall has been ticking up in recent weeks. After bottoming out in the middle of April, we were down 97% in April compared to last year. And overall, right now, we're about 69% as we're starting to recover about 2 or 3%. But that's mainly on the leisure travel side. That's not a lot of work travel that we're seeing there. Over at the Port of Baltimore, that's certainly anything that comes into the port ends up on our rail system or our highway system. So we track that very closely. Look at the first 6 months of the year compared to last year at the port. Container activity is only down about 8%, but our autos coming into the port are down about 35%. So, we're starting to see that activity. On the transit side, throughout the MTA system, which really combines our core bus, commuter bus, light rail, commuter rail, our mobility services, and our metro system. Overall, we were down about 72% at the peak in mid-April, but it has gradually been growing, only be down 55% across the board last week. But if you look at our core bus service in Baltimore, it's a really important data point. Our core bus service reached its lowest point in mid-April by being down about 60%, but it's also been growing. It's only down about 46% right now, which shows us that the ridership in that core bus system in Baltimore are really, a lot of these zero-car households, critical parts of our economy that really need that transit system for that economy to thrive. So it's really important that Baltimore bus system and that core bus system is really important, not only for the recovery, but helping us get through this pandemic. On the customer services side, while certainly not a travel trend, we have our services at MVA, vehicle registrations, those types of things starting to pick up. In May, we added the ability to renew, correct, get a duplicate, CDL license holders, those types of things, adding enhanced features there. But on an average week, we've been able to help serve about 75,000 customers a week through our web services and kiosks by pushing those expanded services. And from a travel perspective, that's one less trip someone has to make to the MVA. So I think that's really important. But we continue to help people do business that way. So the business transactions are important. We are continuing. I've had a few calls over the last couple of weeks with MDE and in fact, our Department of Budget and Management talking about the state workforce and teleworking and understanding that. But we've been working with UMD, our University of Maryland, and our other partners to better understand the air quality side of the COVID-19 impacts, another really important part. This includes investigating the impacts of those key economic indicators, looking at teleworking, looking at unemployment, looking at temporary closures, those types of things. And I'm happy to report that we've seen many employees within MDOT ourselves transition very successfully to a telework environment. Right now, we have about 3,000 employees. That's just under 30% of our entire workforce teleworking very effectively. And we're trying to understand what that looks like long term. How many of those functions could do that and have a better understanding of that. So we've been working very closely with a lot of the other departments, and we're looking at functions to continue that. But we've been working a little bit closer with MDE and Commerce, Department of Commerce, and others to understand the business side. So we have a teleworking analysis tool that we've been working through, and it's been through a peer review, and it's nearly finalized. But the tool has the potential to kind of complement some of the other tools that we have and help us learn more from our business community, learn more from what's out there and what works and what doesn't. But we have our Commuter Choice Maryland program. That's an existing program that's managed by MDOT, but that's really about alternatives to driving alone, such as teleworking, alternative work schedules, biking. University of Maryland is probably going to talk a little bit about the Incent Trip program. We have a great partnership with them where that's a trip planner tool app that allows a user to earn points by taking trips that help reduce congestion and improve air quality, such as ride sharing, transit, biking. You can accumulate points, makes everything a little bit more rewarding, and then you can redeem those reward points for cash. So, if you have the ability to travel in a non-peak time, you can earn points and redeem those in some ways. Right now, it serves the Washington metropolitan region where commuters can earn up to $600 per calendar year as an incentive by earning those points. But that's in partnership with University of Maryland, and we're working to expand the Incent Trip for all Marylanders and see where that can play outside of that region. We have a Maryland commuter tax credit. So the tax credit, somebody can claim up to $100 per employee per month, or 50% of the eligible costs for commuter benefits, and it's van pools, cash in lieu of parking, company-sponsored guaranteed ride home, those types of things. But we've been really supportive of that and those tax credit benefits. House Bill 1012 was the one that Senator McCray passed in 2016, and we've been able to kind of run with that a little bit. But between 2017 and 2020, we've had almost a 240% increase in employer participation and an 850% increase in employee participation in those programs. So that's been really helpful for us. On the partnership side, and I put these all as opportunities to collaborate and learn, we personally have been involved with a group working with the Greater Washington Partnership to really try and work with the businesses to understand how we do that. That's just kind of kicking off, and we're starting to have those conversations and talk to our Department of Commerce and really get a greater understanding of what the businesses may have learned from that. And while we've seen some positive impacts from teleworking, we still feel like it's a little bit early to say, hey, this is going to extend into the future, but we really want to learn from that as this pandemic continues to evolve. What is it going to look like post-vaccine, those types of things. You know, some of the other factors that we're really working closely on is, you know, the cost benefit for employers for increased telework. What is the role in that and where we can benefit from that? Trying to look at the commercial real estate market and what they do and how that's going to impact travel in the region. And I know our regional partners at the MPOs are looking at many of those indicators as well. But we remain committed to monitoring all that travel trend data to better understand how to best deliver transportation solutions to meet the needs of all Marylanders. And our network is really, has always been this system, and we need to focus on that integrated system. And these might look different today than they did a year ago, but I would flag it's a great reminder of the importance of long-range planning that allows us to develop programs and have these conversations to address both the current situation as well as what it would look like in some growth and trying to understand that growth and how that growth will occur. But I won't touch on the modeling components. I'll leave that to Dr. Zhang over at the University of Maryland. But I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. And in closing, I'll restate that I think it's really important that we're collaborating, that we're having these conversations, and then we understand that we're really early on in being able to fully understand and appreciate the drastic impact this pandemic has had on our network, but certainly provides a lot of learning opportunities. And this applies from everything on how we manage operations to how we model the recovery and how we look into the future. So I thank you for having me as part of this today, and I'm happy to answer any questions as we talk about today, tomorrow, and what the future looks like.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Before we do questions with Secretary Slater, let's turn it over to Secretary Grumballs for his remarks. Secretary Grumballs. I think you're on, maybe on mute. The scourge of telecommuting.
Okay. How about now?
Perfect.
All right. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this is Ben Grumballs. I don't know if you can see me. I am going to work on the camera as well. But I am telecommuting today, and I am saving 52 miles, vehicle miles traveled reduced by 52 miles. And I'm also experiencing a little bit of technical difficulty, as well as a cat that keeps wanting to try to get onto the chair with me. But I am teleworking, and I can't be more happy to be part of this discussion about the importance of teleworking, and with my good friend Secretary Slater talking about the opportunities ahead. Couple things I want to emphasize. If you have my, there you go. If you go to the next slide, I'm going to focus on very quickly 4 things. One is that when we entered into this crazy March Madness with COVID-19 and the stay-at-home orders imminent, the Maryland Department of the Environment was already doing research on analyzing air quality and climate change data, and we were doing it in coordination with the University of Maryland College Park, with NASA, with NIST, and we learned we had what they call an accidental experiment, where we were able, because of the stay-at-home orders, we were able to, in real time, get real data about impacts on air quality of dramatically reduced traffic volume. And so I believe it's being made available to you, the report that we with the University of Maryland College Park submitted to the Climate Change Commission, and believe that the committee has it. Have you received that report yet, Mr. Chairman?
I don't think so, but we'll circle up with the staff.
Okay, it's just a summary of traffic volume, and most importantly, from our perspective, impact on pollution, particularly greenhouse gas emissions and NOx, basically the pollutants that form smog, our ozone challenge. And what we were learning from the analysis was there were, based on the use of satellites and tall towers and other technologies to measure pollutants in the air, that we were seeing in March, April, particularly March and April, significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, and also in methane, such CO2 as well as methane, and NOx emissions. And we also were measuring, with a great partnership with the experts, Maryland Department of Transportation, traffic flow, and we recognized that pretty quickly all the light duty vehicles, the traffic was significantly reduced for many weeks. But for trucks, while also reduced, it began significant uptick because of, as Secretary Slater was saying, the use of trucks to deliver goods to people staying at home and not shopping. Basically, what we've learned from that analysis with NASA and NIST and University of Maryland is that while we know that that volume of traffic is over time going to return, what great benefit we could contribute to the environment if we, as those vehicles began to get back on the road, significantly embraced electric vehicles and zero emission vehicles. We could, in essence, be taking half the cars off the road if half the cars that were returning were zero emission electric vehicles. So there were two policy items that came from all that analysis. One is item number 2, and that is that teleworking, working remotely, is important and promising for reducing NOx emissions that contribute to ozone, but specifically CO2, as well as methane, but also getting more traffic off the road. That's a very important component, and I want to assure you that in working with you and other colleagues in the General Assembly, the governor, his cabinet, the entire Hogan administration is focused on the opportunities of more robust teleworking, or as I call it, in-teleworking, because it needs to be intelligent. It needs to be not just reducing pollution and traffic, but also increasing customer service and efficiency and performance. The next item, the policy direction we got from our early research at Maryland Department of the Environment with scientific community, University of Maryland, and NASA and others, is it just reinforces the need for the two to go together, teleworking and also electrification, zero emission vehicles. Tremendously important. Many of you have heard me describe the work of the Climate Change Commission and our work for greenhouse gas reduction throughout the state. And the transportation sector is hugely important in this effort, since it is the sector that is the leading contributor to greenhouse gases. That statistic is the same for most states in the U.S. right now. And so what we're doing, Mr. Chairman, in combining teleworking with more electric vehicles and more electric vehicle charging stations, is showing the way for meeting our ambitious greenhouse gas reduction goals. And I have to share with you the pride that I have, and I know Secretary Slater has, in the fact that Governor Hogan signed on to a very important memorandum of agreement with 15 other states on July 14th, committing the state of Maryland to strive for zero emission vehicles in terms of medium and heavy duty vehicles, trucks and buses by 2050, with a focus on specific milestones and strategies to get to 2030 and then to get to the zero emissions goal of 2050. That's going to require a lot of work, but all the science and the ambition in our greenhouse gas reductions plan emphasizes it needs to be a regional effort as well. Again, combining teleworking with transportation electrification, is going to get to significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions and in ozone and smog. And it needs to be done regionally. It needs to be done regionally so that other places like Pennsylvania, other states upwind of us can benefit Marylanders' lungs and our environment as well. And then the last item, Mr. Chairman, is based on our research, our work, our discussions in the Hogan administration, it's focusing in on what policy incentives can we all work towards. Secretary Slater mentioned some. The governor has been very supportive of and signed into law Clean Cars Act to continue to increase the rebates and tax credits for electric vehicles and more charging stations, building partnerships, building more incentives for fleet modernization. And the other basic component for teleworking is to have a very open and robust discussion about challenges in teleworking. How do we overcome those? And our department is operating at about 80% of us employees are teleworking now. A couple of months ago, it was about 97%. Just the 3% who weren't were the emergency response hazmat folks who were always out on the roads and in the field, so to speak. But I just wanted to conclude, Mr. Chairman, by saying this hearing on teleworking and its advantages is more timely, more important than ever. And we're very eager to work with you, and I'm eager to take questions or to help provide more detail or analysis to you and your colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and congratulations on that regional agreement. Now it's time to do the Transportation and Climate Initiative, which I know you've been very personally focused on.
We're very engaged on that with the Department of Transportation, very much at the table and having discussions and modeling on that. So thank you for your interest on that front as well.
Terrific. The first question is from Vice Chair Krim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Secretary Slater and Secretary Grumbles, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for your time. I am concerned right now that we are in this opportunity zone, and I don't want it to slip away. I know, Secretary Slater, you talked about learning a lot from the data that we are getting regarding the reduction in the number of vehicles on the road. But I think we need to go beyond that. I think we have to be more aggressive now. This is our opportunity to raise telework to a place that people can actually opt for and for businesses to opt for. So I'm going to ask for a response from the secretaries here. And Secretary Grumbles, you said in your testimony that the governor is engaged here on this topic. So I would like there to be a blue ribbon commission, something that we are working on, that we have policies that we are going to propose, and policies that we are going to move forward to get telework on the level that it should be, as we have found out that it works. And then there's so many benefits to it. But there are challenges also, like Secretary Grumble said, there are challenges. So I think that's why we need to have everybody at the table. One thing that I have found in researching this topic and having people send me information on this topic now that they know I'm very much a supporter of it, is that there seems to be silos of people have data, people have information, but we just aren't joining them together to come up with policies. For example, engaging the business community. I'm reaching out to my local chamber to have a discussion with them about this topic. The chair and I are trying to get a meeting with somebody at the federal government to see whether we can advance teleworking opportunities there. So, I just want to get your reaction to getting everybody at the table. Secretary Grubbles, I know you have the Climate Change Commission, but I think this needs to go beyond that. So I just want your response. Thank you. Thank
you. Go ahead, Greg.
Thanks, Secretary Grumbles. I can start and kind of offer a few thoughts. So, always when we're addressing congestion, it has always been this, how can we maximize the roadway footprint and maximize our transit systems to move the most people? And I'm specifically talking about the commute itself. But teleworking has, for the last several years, so I participate in a panel that produces a publication called Commuting in America. It's put out by AASHTO. And we look at it from a Maryland footprint. And Maryland, telecommuting has been, for the last several years, one of the larger growing mode shares, kind of calling it a mode share. And then, of course, we've seen a lot of this growth triple and quadruple in this COVID situation. But certainly, I think, as you were asking the question, my first thought was, how do we get commerce engaged in that conversation, and how do we get the businesses engaged in that conversation? I do think there are some differences in travel regionally that you consider when you dig into the granular parts of the data. So, I think back to and I don't want to speak for TPB because I think they're on this panel as well, but I think back to the Visualize 2045 effort where, it talked about how much of the travel is not, how much of the commuting in the DC region is non-commute versus commute. And we saw a large percentage of really non-commute traffic out there, and some of it was out there in the peak periods, those types of things. But I think I think the solution lies with getting a really diverse collaborative group of folks together to really dig into the data and talk about it and understand what we can do as government entities, what we can do as a state, and kind of how that all fits in to the transportation network. Because I think I'm to the point where I think it's another mode of transportation. And one of the things that I'm going to step out of my lane for a minute, that usually gets me in trouble, but one of the things that we've seen in some of the parts of the state is some of the challenges we have with broadband and that IT network, and making sure that they have that accessibility across the board. So, if there's a job function that could telework, making sure that they have that backbone of that broadband or IT network to support that as well. So I think it's a broad conversation that I think would require a large group of different expertise, diverse set of expertise at the table to talk through.
And now I would just say that in response and following up to Secretary Slater, it is okay to step outside of your lane. Just signal before you do so, and you did that. And we do need a collaborative effort. And Delegate, I would just say to you that as we started getting this information in about the environmental and other benefits, traffic congestion relief and productivity and customer service of a well-run teleworking strategies, the secretaries of general services and budget and management and commerce, along with Greg and myself, are discussing, okay, how do we really set the table for the discussion about a long-term, not just during COVID or immediately after COVID, but for longer-term strategies on teleworking that ensure customer service will not be harmed. I just tell you that one of the reasons so compelling to make sure this is not just state agencies or local governmental agencies, but the private workforces, that some of our initial modeling indicated that if 50% of the state's workforce, public and private sector, teleworked, that would lead to a 3.6 million metric ton reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. That's part of the material that we're submitting to the committee, a chart that says if the Maryland workforce teleworked 75% of the time, both public and private sector, it would lead to a huge reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. But there are real challenges in those types of numbers. That robust teleworking is going to require some real coordination among not just environment and transportation and commerce and budget and buildings agencies, but others, because it involves locating workstations, remote workstations, and gathering places, and it involves a lot of different competing and potential trade-offs. But it's very promising, and the lieutenant governor and the governor are very much aware and challenging us all in the cabinet to look at and survey our staff on the future of teleworking and what opportunities there are. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Beitzel has the next question.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Am I on?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, we've raised some very interesting topics, but there's obviously great advantages to teleworking, and obviously to reduce pollution and other things, but it also creates problems. And the problems that it creates and is going to create is if MDE and the state and our governor and other governors meet their objectives to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and everything else. I think we seen on that one chart that there was 55%, there's a 55% reduction, or they're down at a 55% level of mass transit users on all the systems. And so mass transit, as you know, Mr. Chairman, depends a lot on highway user revenues that come from automobile sales and transfers and everything else. And so that begs the question, where's all the money going to come to operate these systems when we go to electric cars that are not buying gasoline? And, then the other side is it's on the economy itself. There's no gas sales and there's no transportation. There's less usage of the commercial facilities. There's going to be a whole change in the economy. In fact, it goes clear across the whole economic sector that's going to reduce revenues to government. So where is the money going to come from? So Secretary Slater and Secretary Grumbles, have you given that any thought in this arena?
So nothing like an easy one out of the gate, but so I have to admit that I haven't thought about that from a telework perspective, but certainly that's been an industry conversation over the last several years in trying to understand that as vehicles themselves get more fuel efficient, as we have more efficient transit systems and people are traveling in very different ways. What does that model look like? I think that's probably might even be a discussion in itself at some point. What does that model look like? But certainly, we're trying to look at what all those alternatives look like, and which ones will work for Maryland, because I think there's a variety of states across the country that are looking at what those different models could look like, and what we're doing is kind of watching all of them to understand and be able to have a conversation on what would work for Maryland if all of a sudden what we're doing doesn't work. But I certainly, I don't think we're ready to commit to any new model at this point. I think there's a lot more conversation that would have to take place.
Delegate Bites, were you?
And Mr. Chairman,
please.
yeah, I was just going to say to the delegate, we agree. There is no free lunch. There are impacts. There are potential trade-offs. Any strategy that involves environment and transportation needs to have viable funding strategies, and that's one of the really important discussions that requires a lot of folks beyond just an environment secretary or a transportation secretary. And we are enthused about whatever big new shift towards a clean energy economy, that it be done in a thoughtful and balanced way with, just like the transition from coal to natural gas to clean and renewable energies. There needs to be a just transition so that communities and workers are always at the forefront and how they're going to be impacted immediately and over the longer term. But thank you. And duly noted that that's always an important consideration to take into account as we get closer and closer to zero emission vehicles.
If I could follow up too, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
We're talking about telecommuting, and so, various segments of the economy are more susceptible to being able to accomplish those kind of things. And obviously there are things that you just can't telecommute for. But one of the things that I think Secretary Slater had raised about making sure we provide customer service. Well, I can tell you, I'm getting more and more complaints. I had a young man this morning that wanted to get a title transfer, and he called and called and called, and all he gets is a busy signal. And when he gets somebody, finally he ended up getting an appointment. He has to go clear to Annapolis from Garrett County to get an appointment to transfer a title. And there's some things where you have people want in-person service. And so my comment, I guess, would be that if we're going to for more telecommuting, and this becomes the trend of the future, and we're going to, as a government entity or as a General Assembly, push for encouraging more of this. We got to make sure that we're going to have decent service.
Thank you, Delegate Pike. So it's a good point. I can't telecommute a haircut. Delegate Kittleman, next question.
Did you say me?
Delegate Kittleman, that's you.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to begin by, Ben, you were more successful than I am. He's been listening in the entire conversation. This may have been covered, but I wanted to make sure that I'm clear on when we're looking at the decrease in traffic. Teleworking is certainly a huge part of it, but so is the fact that a lot of businesses have gone out of business and other reasons that people are not on the roads. And I wondered if that has been parsed out so that we know what portion is coming from telecommuting.
No, I'll say that we don't have that granular of a data yet, but we're working with some groups on some outreach surveys and those types of things in hopes to get some of that. I think it's, take the capital region, for instance. For the most part, the federal government is still on a telework type environment. That's probably more impacting the ridership on our transit systems and our commuter systems than it is the vehicles that are out there. But I do think it's important to understand kind of what that is as we start to, we're already starting in this recovery, but what it's going to look like post vaccine, I think is really important, and kind of where those businesses are going to land and what's going to be out there and what's not going to be out there. But I do think it's important to get that kind of granular detail on the data to understand what's out there now, who's traveling out there now, what they're traveling out there for. And then as we start to see things grow, what's that purpose of their trip, those types of things.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Great.
thank you.
Sorry, Secretary Grumbles, you're going to add something?
I just, because we can't parse out with precision the difference that's being brought up. We're not celebrating the increase in air quality because part of it could be due to just the the closures or temporary closures of businesses, and that's nothing to celebrate. But what it does do is it reinforces our commitment to say, well, as those businesses reopen on this roadmap to recovery, if we include more teleworking and electrification so that we have zero emission vehicles, we will be able to continuously celebrate more progress in clean air. But you're very, absolutely correct that we don't celebrate any kind of, business closures or shutdowns. It's more about successful teleworking and zero emission or cleaner cars on the roads when they have to be and need to be and want to be on the roads. Thank you.
Great. Any more questions from the subcommittee members? Seeing none, thank you to both secretaries for taking the time to join us. Of course, you're welcome to stay for the subsequent panels. We'll turn it now to the Maryland Transportation Institute. I'm not sure how you all are planning your presentation, so I'll leave it to your discretion, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Chairman Corman and Vice Chairwoman Krim, for your invitation. We have, this is Lei Zhang. I'm the director of the Maryland Transportation Institute. I'm very happy to be here today with my distinguished colleague, Professor Deb Niemeyer, who is the co-director of the Maryland Transportation Institute, and probably the most renowned researcher on transportation and air quality internationally, and an expert on transportation and broader equity issues. She's also on a web meeting with me, as well as Professor Chen-Feng Xiong, who is the assistant director, who actually did all the work behind the slides you will see. So if thank you very much. We were asked to make a presentation on the COVID impact on travel demand and congestion, as well as its implications on congestion mitigation and travel demand management strategies, specifically with relation to telecommuting. Next slide, please. And let me just first tell you just a bit about Maryland Transportation Institute, if you have not heard of us before. So we are a transportation research branch led by the University of Maryland at College Park, but we also have faculty affiliates and collaborators at Morgan State University, University of Maryland, Baltimore, Frostburg State University, University of Maryland at Eastern Shore, and Johns Hopkins University. So you can think of us as really a multi-university collaborative entity that is hosted and led by University of Maryland at College Park. I'm very proud to say that we are a well-recognized international leader in transportation data and data-driven decision support. So essentially, if there is anything you want to know about different modes of transportation, including some of the questions I heard earlier, chances are, if there is a place in the world that you can find the data for it, to answer that question, it's probably at the University of Maryland. And we are an independent hub for transportation research and policy studies, workforce development, and technology commercialization. Next slide, please. And we have been doing a lot of work related to COVID-19 and its impact on transportation. We have put together a data.covid.umd.edu platform. This platform has really got its fame, and it's currently used. So essentially, we use all the data we have for the entire nation, including all the counties in Maryland. We look at the impact on travel, different kinds of travel, look at the impact on the economy, on vulnerable population groups, as well as on health. So the CDC, the U.S. Department of Transportation, Veterans Affairs, Department of Treasury, Federal Reserve Banks, as well as many states and many counties and cities in Maryland and beyond are using our data to look at various kinds of COVID-related issues. So, I think it's been featured in Washington Post probably 10 times already. For a while, we were busy, just getting interviews on this. So if you're interested, you can go there and you probably can see a lot of data for your local jurisdictions as well. Next slide, please. That was an introduction. So we have been closely monitoring the impact of COVID on all kinds of travel behavior. So this slide shows the green curve is the number of daily trips made by all Marylanders by all modes of transportation every single day in 2019, from January 1st to December 31st. That's the green curve. And the red curve is the 2020, right? So you can see the big difference there. And we do, where do we get the data? This data comes from anonymized smartphone app data. So we essentially get this kind of data with privacy protection from more than 80% of the population nationwide. So we are able to, for instance, answer questions such as, I believe Delegate Kittleman just asked about why people are still traveling on the roads, where they're traveling, where they're going to at aggregate level. We can go to the county level to look at these issues, and roadway level, specific transit lines, to really be able to provide probably the most comprehensive travel data by all modes of transportation anywhere in the state of Maryland. Next slide, please. And certainly this is what everybody saw. And this data is from our University of Maryland lab. So the top graphs shows the level of congestion from February to July. So we're showing the average weekday level of congestion. You see a lot of reds, and we know where they are. Then at the bottom, that's 2019 without a pandemic. Then the bottom graphs are from 2020. Certainly, we saw that. And even in June and July 2020, when we start seeing, as you just saw from Secretary Slater's presentation, we're seeing 70, 80, 85% of the traffic coming back in July, but the July level of congestion is still pretty low. We still don't see a lot of congestion, even though we're getting almost 85% of the traffic back on the road. So that's a very interesting and important observation. And I should also mention that our study focused on the morning peak hour at this point. Next slide. And so here is data from Maryland DOT and from our lab also. So this is showing from January 1st until August 8th this year. What's the change of, this is not all modes, this is just driving modes, the change of traffic in each week. So we are back to about 80-85% level. At the bottom, in April, we're down by 50%, and you saw this also in in Secretary Slater's presentation. So the key message here is that we were down by more than 50%, and now we're coming back up to 80-85% already. But still, we don't see a lot of traffic jams. Next slide. So these are all based on actual data we collected from the roads, from smartphones. So this, in terms of a summary, observe the traffic data analysis. We have 2 points. Traffic volumes are now at 80-85% of the pre-pandemic level, but congestion has not come back yet. Great. So what does that tell us? A 15% reduction in traffic volume observed in July 2020 was able to eliminate almost all traffic bottlenecks in a region. So naturally, it may not be realistic to expect we're going to continue having more than 15% of the traffic not coming back. So the question is, hey, what if we could convince just 5% or 10% or maybe even 2% of people to continue working from home, or otherwise avoid driving during a peak period? What would the benefits of that be in the state of Maryland in terms of reduction in congestion, energy use, and emissions. So that's the question we answered using our model system. The next slide, please. So in the next several slides, I'll show you a modeling study that we did. So we want to answer that question of what if we have 5% or 10% reduction in travel demand? What's the benefit? So we use a tool that's called, at Maryland Transit Institute, as our regional transportation systems simulation tool. It simulates everyone's travel behavior, travel decisions, how we travel. It also simulates traffic second by second in an entire region. So in order to obtain estimates of traffic congestion, energy use, and emissions. So we pick an area, which is the purple, the purple area that includes some of the major commuter regions in the DC Baltimore region. We look at the morning peak hours from 5 to 10 a.m. Because in the morning, we have a usually higher percentage of traffic that's for commuting. In the afternoon, people actually drive in congested afternoon peak hours to go shopping, do their errands. They're actually, if you look at in the morning, we probably have nearly half of the traffic, actually more than half of the traffic for commuting. But if you look at the afternoon peak periods, less than 20% of the traffic is actually for commuting. More than 80% of the traffic in the afternoon are for non-commuting purposes. But anyway, we look at the baseline with existing pre-pandemic travel levels. Then we look at three scenarios. What if we have a 5% reduction in demand in scenario 1, or 10%, or 15%? What's going to happen? Next slide, please. So the results are consistent with our observed data. If you look at this graph on the left-hand side of the slide, you will see that if you just focus on the red curve shows that as we get less traffic on the road, we're seeing much less congestion. On the right-hand side, if we have 15% demand decrease, less traffic, we would see almost a 60% reduction in congestion. So it's not linear. When we have just a small number of individuals not driving during the peak hour, we will see a very significant reduction in congestion and its associated benefits. What about 5%? What if we just get 5% of the people not to drive during peak hours? So that's the second column. So even with just a 5% reduction in demand, we would still be able to accomplish 23% reduction in congestion. So that's very significant. If you look at annual benefits, we assume a value of time. Each hour is worth, each hour of reduction in travel, of sitting in traffic is worth about $15. What that means is that annually, we would be able to save commuters more than $900 million just in the peak period if we can have 15% of them not commuting during the peak periods. The next slide, you will see results for specific corridors in our region, like I-270, 495, I-95, and I-70. If we just look at, for instance, I-270, if we just get 5% of the people who commute on I-270 not commute, we would see, this is a top left graph, right? 5%, that's the second column. We would be able to see a 32% reduction in congestion. If we get a 15% of them not commuting during the peak hours, then we would get a 71% reduction. If you look at some of the other roadways, you will see a similar trends. Next slide, please. And we are also able to estimate energy use and the greenhouse gas emissions reduction when we have fewer people traveling on the road. And so again, the conclusion is that when we have 5% or 10% less traffic, we will see more than a 5% or 10% reduction in energy use and greenhouse gas emissions. So not only the vehicles that are not traveling save gas, but because of the reduction in congestion, other vehicles will also be able to save gas and emit less into the environment. And we also produce some aggregate level estimates on the number of tons of greenhouse gas emissions that would be reduced annually if 15% of the demand is not there, which is 650,000 tons just in the morning peak hour. So the benefit to the environment can be very, very significant. Next slide, please. And so to summarize what we have learned from this modeling and simulation analysis is that just a, actually this is a, so just a 5% reduction in travel demand can lead to anywhere between 32 to 58% reduction in traffic congestion, depending on which specific roadway you look at, right? So what does that mean, 5%? If we take I-270 as an example, there are about 114,000 vehicles using I-270 in the morning peak periods. 5% means about 5,700 vehicles. So if we could just get 5,700 drivers to do something else, whether they telework or they commute off-peak hours, or they don't use 270, use another route, then we would be able to accomplish a very significant reduction in reduce the congestion, right? And so the bottom point on the slide, basically argues that many people, as we know, are working from home. Actually, we actually on the COVID platform, if you go there, you will see our daily estimate on how many people are working from home in every single state, in every single county in the nation. We actually have a new national study funded by National Science Foundation on the impact of COVID on each industry sector at the county level for the entire nation, right? So if you're interested in economic impact, on job impact, we have some other data that we can supply to you also. So the question we ask is, so we've learned that a small reduction, even a small reduction in travel demand can have significant benefits on all kinds of things. So do we have a solution right now that can be scaled up and accomplish such demand management goals? Not next year, but right now, because we have an interesting time window, as Delegate Kramer also mentioned, because the most difficult thing to change about a person is his or her behavior. We know that because of the COVID, many people have changed their behavior, not just teleworking. From our data, we saw that people also change when they travel, how they travel, where they go to, even shopping behavior. We see many fewer people shopping during the afternoon peak periods. Now they're doing their shopping earlier in the day. That's good. There's no reason for you to sit for me or anyone. If we have a choice of going shopping at a different time, to sit in traffic for an hour before we reach Costco or Giant, right? So people have already changed the behavior. Is there a way we can help them sustain that behavior, which is good for the environment, which helps reduce congestion? And it's not that they don't travel anymore. They're just traveling in a way that does not contribute to increase in congestion. So from that point of view, the revenue is still there, right? I think that is a truly win-win situation. But the question is, can we get there, right? So that's a big question. Next slide. I have 2 more slides, now I'll be done. So the answer is yes. In our region, led by Maryland DOT, led by our MPOs, I'm sure the Department of Environment probably has similar programs that just I'm not aware of because the limitation of my own knowledge, that we've already got existing tools for managing travel demand. So for instance, this is something that Secretary Slater mentioned, is a collaboration between Maryland DOT, Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, their Commuter Choice and Commuter Connections program. So we've already got tools that provide incentives to incentivize commuters to work from home or choose a different time to commute. And this can also be used to encourage, to allow employers to use the platform. So there are more than 16,000 employers in the demand management program already. So long story short, we've already got tools that can allow us to nudge people to keep the good behavior we see right now, and stay that way. When we have some of them stay that way, not commuting during the peak hours, then we could create, we can get there. Next slide, please. So some of my thoughts, our thoughts, I would say, from Maryland Transportation Institute on effectively incentivizing telecommuting. And we it's ought to be a partnership among our state DOTs and other state agencies such as MDE, MPOs, and employers together. And the second thing is that we should leverage advanced technology. If we decide to incentivize telecommuting, then we should not give credits to someone who is already telecommuting year after year after year. We should really incentivize those who just need a little bit more nudging to change behavior, to stay, work from home. But once they have established that habit of working from home, then we probably don't need to give them the credit and use taxpayers' money to do that anymore. We can shift that to incentivize some others, right? So I think we should leverage that in terms of personalized incentives, so we can be more effective. And I would say that let's nudge travelers not only to telecommute, but also incentivize them to do other things that's also good for the system. They can always change their travel modes. They can change their departure time. They can change their routes and where they go to. And these all mitigate congestion and reduce energy use and emissions, right? And we've already got tools. We've already got programs already in place to do that today. We don't even need to wait. And then we should have continuous performance and effectiveness evaluation on any new programs we put in place, as well as on the existing program. And we really should consider deployment right now to really leverage the new behavior during COVID-19. That leads me to, I think, my last slide, which just to tell you some of the key people in our institute. They are on the phone right now. And I'm not sure if there is time, if Deb, if there is anything you want to offer. And Professor Niemeyer has actually led all the California. We just recruited her from University of California at Davis. She's a member of the National Academy of Engineering, and has before she joined our university, she led the California air quality study for nearly 10 years. She's really the brain and the leader behind a lot of this great greenhouse gas emission and air quality studies in the state of California. Not sure if we have time for Deb to say a few words.
I thank you all very much for having us here today. It's a pleasure and an honor to address you. I think rather than me saying anything, if there are questions that Leigh and I can answer, that might be a really good use of the time at this point.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for the great presentation. It may have been in there, but are you able to show, what those percentage reductions mean for different travel times, say like Waldorf to DC, which is a very common commuting pattern area we hear a lot of congestion concerns about, and not enough being done for Southern Maryland traffic. Is that something you all have? Is that something that can be run to show people you reduced by 5%? This is the reduction in travel time.
Yeah, the short answer is yes, because we analyze the total travel time without the reduction in travel demand, and we show the new travel time after we have, for instance, 5%, 10%, or 15% fewer people on the roads for every single origin destination pair in our region. Previously, we actually provided a similar function to the Maryland DOT commuter choice website. Anyone can go in there, type, say, this is where I live, this is where I work, and show me my commuter options. And we would actually, based on the origin and destination, tell them, hey, if you change your behavior, if you leave home a bit earlier or later, or if you switch to an electric vehicle, what's the benefit to yourself in terms of reduction in commute time? And also what's the benefit to the entire system in terms of reduce the congestion, energy use, and emissions for other drivers as well.
Thank you. I might follow up with you for some specific examples, if that's all right. The next question is from our full committee Vice Chair Jackson.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. I may have missed it. I'm sort of toggling between my day job here, but the study covered I-270, 70, and 495. Did that run from American Legion Bridge, the American Legion Bridge, to the Woodrow Wilson Bridge?
Yes. On the Maryland
thank
side.
you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And also, secondly, Mr. Chair, look, I am a strong proponent for teleworking. My wife has worked for the federal government for 34 years. I started out in the federal government. It works. It keeps traffic off the road. Secretary Slater and I have forged a great relationship. I live in Brandywine, which is in Southern Maryland. But I can tell you that I appreciate you all being here today. I appreciate the chair and vice chair putting this together. The more information we have, the better we are. When I leave this meeting, after I get off my job, Secretary Slater, we have the Tri-County Council for Southern Maryland meeting regarding road projects. So thank you for the information today. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Delegate Beitzel.
Let me get unmuted. Am I all right now?
Yep, we can hear you.
A good report. A lot of interesting work. Did you get all that information from Google?
I believe we actually have more. In some ways, we have more privacy protected data than Google. So this all come from. We're not able to get that kind of data from Google, to answer your question. But we've been working with both the federal government as well as with our state agency, especially Maryland DOT. And I still remember the day, actually, my first day at University of Maryland, I think into 1 month, I met now Secretary Slater, when at the time he was leading the planning office at the State Highway Administration. So we've been really building our data asset since really, right after 9/11. So over the past 20 years, I'm very proud to say that University of Maryland has established probably the most comprehensive transportation data center in the entire nation. So we get data on driving, and it's also multimodal. So we can provide data on how many people are walking, here or there in the state, safety data. So we do collaborate with Google and Waze in certain ways. We do all that work, not because we just love digging into the data. We want the data to provide value, especially value to decision makers, such as, all of you. So if there is any needs, you can certainly feel free to reach out to us or to Greg, to Secretary. Sorry, Greg, I can't keep saying. All right, so this is formal. Okay. You can always ask Secretary Slater. I mean, he also knows how to find the right person here at the University of Maryland. I'm sure Secretary Grumble too, because apparently he's been working with quite a few of our faculty members as well.
Yeah, my question is, you indicated the traffic flow now is back up to about 85% of what it was before COVID-19. So can you break out, or can you factor into, we have a lot of businesses shut down. We have a lot of high unemployment. All the restaurants and the theaters and the ball games. And so with only a 15% reduction, what percentage of that is just actually people working at home?
We actually do know that. And actually, let me tell you this. we're helping quite a few counties and cities. That includes Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Prince George's County, and many, many others in the state of Maryland to actually monitor number of visits at aggregate level to different kinds of places, restaurants, this is more for COVID response because we need to,
Right.
ensure there is a way for them to allocate scarce resources as we reopen, right? So we actually go to individual point of interest and business level to see if the business has come back for specific restaurant, for all the restaurants in Prince George's County, in Baltimore County. And so we, let us know what specific question to have. I also mentioned that we're working with National Science Foundation to produce unemployment estimates by economic sector and work from home estimates for the entire nation, because many others outside of Maryland are using our data as well. So we can certainly supply a data or provide analysis for our state if needed.
Delegate Bitzel, I'm not sure he answered your question. Could you rephrase your question?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you have some kind of breakdown, and just more specifically, just a breakdown of out of that 15% of the traffic that is now less than what it was before COVID. Out of that 15%, how much of that is really people staying at home, or how much is that related to people that are not working because they're unemployed in their businesses because the businesses are shut down?
Right.
That's the question.
Go ahead, Leigh.
Yeah, I said we can provide. The way we can answer that question
Well,
is
if you don't,
if you don't have,
I'm sure you don't specifically know it.
Right. So I want to say the way we can answer that question is for all the people who stay at home now, who used to go to office to work, we can separate them between two cases, whether they're working from home or they lost their jobs and they haven't found a new job yet. We can separate that. But
Right.
but the 15% reduction is a bit more complex, because when people do not go to work physically, what we've seen in our data is that they started making more other trips, right? So it's actually not just if they don't work from home, all the travel on the roads disappeared, but they tend to actually make more non-work trips. So I think if there's any policy to try to leverage the current behavior change, it ought to be comprehensive, maybe not just on telework, but on a comprehensive policy package that also really that encourage all kinds of behavior that contributes to the final goals that you have, that you want for our state, which is, I assume, congestion reduction, reduction in fossil energy use and emissions, while making sure the revenue is still sustainable, so that you still have the funds to invest in the much needed infrastructure.
So I think to package it a little bit differently, the way to think about it a little bit is that when somebody telecommutes from home, and we've seen this for a very long time, when somebody telecommutes from home, there's what is known as the rebound effect. And that rebound effect they play out in non-work trips. And so just because you're home doesn't mean you're doing the same number. Exactly. And so there's this tension that you could imagine would occur between air quality, congestion, and GHGs, right? Because the only way, in a very blanket statement, the only way to reduce GHGs is to either have renewable fuels or reduce VMT. That's it. So you either go electric and you reduce VMT, or you don't get GHG down. But you can reduce congestion through the telecommuting, but if the rebound effect is too big, you erase the GHG benefits. So there's a tension in here that has many dimensions to it, more than just congestion or just GHG or just air quality.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Bites. So just because it's been mentioned a few times, let me say what I said at the top, which is that no one is happy with the current state of affairs. No one is happy with a permanent lockdown. No one is happy with pandemic-induced telework. The question is, can we learn from this moment when we get back to a more sustainable economy? Vice Chair Krim, next question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lee, when we first talked, and you sent me the email saying that if we could have a 5 to 15% reduction in traffic, we could have free flow traffic throughout the state. And I think that is what I just woke up at that point and said, okay, now is the time to really get busy on this. And I want to highlight what the chair was talking about. This is not only for the Washington region, this is across the state. This is a statewide initiative that you can help with. It's not only one area of the state. Mm-hmm. So I think we have to emphasize that too. Mm-hmm. And also, the long-term effects of e-commerce. So Deb, you know, you're talking about the rebound effect, and that is the traditional response to telework. You have this rebound effect. But now we have a new era. So people are using e-commerce more.
That's right.
They may like it better, and they may end up using it more. So maybe you don't have the rebound effect that you traditionally had with telework. Would you comment on that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think we don't know exactly. There's some early studies coming out, but they haven't been peer reviewed yet. But we don't know exactly what the rebound effect is going to be. And you can see the phenomena you're talking about if you look nationally at reductions in air quality. So, for example, NOx nationally went down about 12%. PM only went down about 1%. And that's the effect of suddenly buying things online and the truck and the freight industry taking off while we're buying stuff online. So you're absolutely right. Number one, we don't know what's going to happen in terms of the rebound effect. Number two, there are these air quality dimensions that have to be taken into consideration as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I would just add that, you know, in the past, we typically get this kind of data every 5-10 years, but now with technology, we are able to now monitor changes in this kind of behavior, whether or not people are shopping more or they're just staying home waiting for the packages to arrive. And do we see a lot more delivery trips? So we actually now get really high quality data to allow us to look at these trade-offs and the way how life is changing because of technology and also because of this unfortunate pandemic.
Thank you. I don't see any more hands raised from my colleagues, so we're going to go to our third and final panel, which are representatives of two of our metropolitan planning organizations, Kelly Russell from the National Capital Region Transportation Planning Board and Linda Eisenberg from the Baltimore Regional Transportation Board. I think they have some transportation experts with them as well, some staff folks, but I'm not sure if they're planning to speak or not. So with that, I'll turn it over to you in whichever order you prefer, as long as my region goes first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the invitation to be part of the subcommittee discussion today. I'm Kelly Russell, President Pro Tem of the Board of Aldermen for the City of Frederick, up at the top of 270. I'm here today in the capacity of the chair of the National Capital Region Transportation Planning Board, or TPB, the region's metropolitan planning organization. I have the pleasure of having Chair Corman as a colleague on the TPB, and Vice Chair Krim is a former aldermanic colleague of mine. She is an alternate member of the board. So I'll try and stay within my 10 minutes and be glad to answer any questions or require any follow-up discussions. I'd also like to note that I have asked TPB's director, Conti Srikanth, to join us. He's my technical guy, and he is available as a resource for the subcommittee for today's discussion or any follow-up discussion as well. Right. Next slide, please. A brief refresher about the TPB. It is a creation of federal law funded primarily by the US DOT with matching funds from MDOT and the local governments within the TPB's planning area. This map displays our planning area, which includes Southern Maryland, Northern Virginia, and the entire District of Columbia. We encompass 23 jurisdictions, a bit over 37,000 square miles, about 5 million people, a bit over 3 million jobs, and we boast 141 activity centers or places that are primed for future growth. Next slide, please. I'm in receipt of the July 6, 2020 letter from the chair and the vice chair of the subcommittee. I draw from the letter first a premise and then a proposal or a call for action. So the premise is that the highly urbanized regions in the state of Maryland, and Baltimore in particular, have unacceptable levels of congestion. Current conditions in the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as University of Maryland analysis, show us that a reduction in peak period travel by teleworking can reduce congestion on our roadways. Based on this premise, the call for action, as I understand it, is for MDOT to investigate and propose policy initiatives to reduce congestion using telework as a strategy. The TPB agrees with the premise and supports the call of the subcommittee. The TPB's own work over the span of about 40 years has been promoting this strategy. Now, let me briefly highlight some of this work. Next slide, please. Up until the current pandemic-related travel restrictions, peak period congestion in the National Capital Region was unacceptable. When the TPB adopted its long-range transportation plan in 2014, this peak period congestion was forecast to grow by 60 to 70%. Next slide, please. Even after a planned investment of about $40 billion in a 25-year period. The board decided that it would not accept this version of the future and established a task force to figure out how we could change this forecast. Next slide, please. TPB's analysis started with a comparison of improvements from the current planned investment to improvements that could be completed if we implemented all the projects the state and local agencies have on their books. The analysis showed a few things. One, the existing levels of congestion were already high and unacceptable. We know. Number two, the forecasted population and employment growth will further increase travel demand. Three, the planned level of investment and the mix of projects isn't enough to expand system capacity, so congestion will grow. And four, we will not have the kind of money needed to implement all the plans. But even if we did and completed all the projects, it would not solve the congestion problem. So this meant that investments would have to be made more strategically and project types would have to be revisited. Next slide, please. The TPB analyzed 10 specific scenarios, a combination of land use and transportation investments. While the analysis showed that no one initiative could both reduce congestion and accommodate future growth and demand, it also showed the need for a multimodal transportation system that offers reliability and resiliency. Consequently, the TPB adopted 5 motorized travel initiatives to address congestion while accommodating anticipated growth. These 5 are highlighted here, and each of these has the potential to achieve the goals of reducing congestion and accommodating growth to varying degrees. The common themes of all 5 initiatives are moving more people rather than more vehicles and reducing the demand for travel, or travel demand management, TDM. Next slide, please. The TPB analysis of travel demand strategies clearly showed the significant potential TDM strategies have in not just reducing congestion, but also supporting the anticipated growth travel demand. As we saw in the previous slide, this was the only strategy that had the maximum number of positive trends in green highlights and no negative implications with those in the red. The TPB has had a regional TDM program since the early 1970s when it started helping people find partners to form carpools. This program, Commuter Connections, has now grown to be an approximately $6 million per year program, and teleworking has been a major component of it since 1995. MDOT has been funding the program along with VDOT and DDOT. Current pandemic-related restrictions have required employers and their employees to really rethink their travel patterns and travel behavior. Teleworking has been used the most and has proven that it can work for many people and businesses. Next slide, please. The TPB has conducted State of the Commute surveys since 2001 to evaluate how effective the various TDM programs have been, including teleworking. The latest survey from 2018 shows that within the TPB's planning area, about 40% of the jobs are not telework suitable, which means about 60% are. 35% of commuters telework already, ranging from 5 days a week to less than once a month, averaging 1.2 days a week. And lastly, 25% of commuters do have telework suitable jobs that are not teleworking, but would like to at some frequency. Next slide, please. The TPB has also examined cost effectiveness and other benefits of TDM programs, including teleworking. Such benefits are not just in congestion reduction, but also in cleaner air, reduced energy consumption, and increased safety on the roads. Therefore, the TPB adopted this as one of its initiatives to address congestion and accommodate growth. Next slide, please. The TPB's initiative is not just about teleworking, although it is a big piece of it. This is partly because while there has been growth in telework, the growth has been slow and incremental, 22% in 16 years, averaging about 1.2% per year. Next slide, please. Also, as we saw in the TPB's earlier analysis, just telework or just alternative work schedules would not be sufficient to get rid of today's congestion or growth in travel demand and its resulting congestion. We also want to capture those who have non-telework jobs, that's 40% of all jobs, and non-work trips. Work trips are only about 25% of the daily trips. Next slide. The TPB is calling for alternative work schedules, diverting trips from peak hours to the edges of peak hours, and having people form carpools for non-work trips. Commuter Connections have added programs within the past few years, Pool Rewards, as you heard earlier, Incent Trip, and Carpool Now. MDOT has been contributing to all of these initiatives. And last slide, please. In conclusion, additional policies to get more of the state and private sector employers to have employees telework would be helpful. And the pandemic period appears to have provided us with an opportunity and environment for governments at all levels and private sectors to be receptive and responsive to a call for increased telework or alternate work schedules. I thank you for this opportunity, and we will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Chair Russell. Chair Eisenberg.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you again for the invitation to be here today. With me is also Don Halligan with our Baltimore Metropolitan Council, staff to the MPO, who will also assist with answering any technical questions. So again, I am Linda Eisenberg. I'm the current empowered chair of the Baltimore Regional Transportation Board and the last batter up today. And I'm also the planning director of Carroll County. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. I also want to say I've had an opportunity to visit the CAT Lab back in the winter. Truly impressive facility and all the great work they do. So I just found that presentation that was given really, really interesting for today. So about the Baltimore Regional Transportation Board, very quickly, we are the MPO for the Baltimore region, and all the plans and programs and federal transportation funds through this region come through this board. The board is supported by 11 active subcommittees, from our bicycle pedestrian advisory group, air quality, to a group that also focuses on removing disaster debris. Can you go to the next slide, please? So this map shows the Baltimore region. We are made up of the cities of Annapolis and Baltimore City, as well as the 6 surrounding counties, with most recently Queen Anne's County on the Eastern Shore joining our MPO. So we are much smaller than the Washington region, but just as mighty. You can go to the next slide. So as with our other organizations you've heard from, our MPO has been focusing on economic and transportation impacts from the COVID pandemic. BMC has launched a regional recovery dashboard that tracks unemployment, labor markets, and transportation data so that we can understand the impacts and prepare countermeasures to lessen these and lead us to a faster recovery. The dashboard, as you can see on the slide, utilizes Tableau, a data visualization tool to provide information in a highly interactive format. The website is an evolving project that can be found on the side link. That's the last bullet. Next page, please. This slide shows a screen capture from one of the layers of information used to summarize the impacts of COVID-19 on transportation in the Baltimore region. The graphic displays the impacts of the shutdown on general traffic through time. With traffic bottoming out in April, down 50% from the previous year, the numbers have now rebounded to 20%. This dashboard highlights other key transportation indicators in the Baltimore region, including transit ridership, truck volumes, and trips across the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. A second transportation dashboard summarizes county-level transportation behavior, including the percentage of people staying at home, miles traveled per person, and trips per person. If you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Here's a screen capture of truck volume impacts. And this has been discussed a lot during these presentations. You'll note fluctuations prior to the shutdown with reduction bottoming out around 20%, not nearly as much as general traffic. So as we've all stated, commerce is still moving forward even with the stay-at-home orders and people commuting, telecommuting. Can you go to the next slide? So this slide shows the impact on MTA services, specifically transit ridership in the region. Transit ridership has been severely impacted, as we all know, by COVID-19. Can we go to the next slide? So how many jobs can be done at home? And this is one of the big questions we've all been talking about and asking. The University of Chicago released a white paper this spring and was finalized in June, examining how many jobs can be done at home. The white paper evaluates the economic impacts of social distancing, measures taken to arrest the spread of COVID-19, and raises a fundamental question about the economy that seems to be the topic of the hearing today. How many jobs can be performed from home? The researchers classified the feasibility of working from home for all occupations and merged this classification with occupational employment counts. Generally, they found that 37% of jobs in the US can be performed entirely at home, but this is a significant variation across cities and industries. These jobs typically pay more than jobs that cannot be done at home and account for 46% of all US wages. They applied their occupational classification to 85 other countries and found that lower income economies have lower share jobs that can be done at home. You can go to the next slide, please. Here are the sectors on the slide that show found most eligible for telework by the University of Chicago. We can share an evolving portion of our work that is soon to be made available on this dashboard. Using the findings and methodology from the University of Chicago to the Baltimore region's data and found plausible results with some caveats. This chart shows the educational services eligible with schools going virtual, but the question remains, how long will virtual schooling persist? You can go to the next slide, please. So this shows two graphs, pie charts. On the right, prior to shutdown, telework in the Baltimore region was roughly 5%. Post-shutdown and using the University of Chicago's methodology, we estimate that over 41% of the jobs in the Baltimore region are eligible to be performed at home, compared with 37% nationally. You can go to the next slide, please. Telework in 2018 by sector is shown here. Green bars on the right indicate the percentage of workers who reported telecommuting 1 day a week in 2018, roughly 5.1%. And this is spread, as you can see, amongst many industries. So again, telework was not widespread prior to COVID. So if you can go to the next slide. Thank you. When applied to the two-digit standard occupational classification for the Baltimore region, the breakdown by job sector is shown here. You can go between the prior slide and this slide and understand where the significant changes occur. As the method dictated, higher wage jobs are more likely to be eligible from work from home. Give you a minute to take a look at the slide. So we can go to the next slide. The state and the region are currently experiencing a significant increase in unemployment that is also the result of COVID-19. There has been a significant shift away from transit in the region due partly to evolving understanding of how the disease spreads and reductions in transit services. The impacts of our urban and suburban centers in the region is still evolving. We have been learning that telework can work for certain sectors, if resources could be found, we suggest a competitive pilot program of employer-based incentives to measure the elasticity of telework post-pandemic. And so with that, we're happy to take any questions that you may have. And again, thank you so much for having this opportunity to address the committee.
Thank you, Chair Eisenberg. Are there any questions from my colleagues? Vice Chair Krim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairwomen from your perspective MPOs. Thank you so much for attending and providing all this good information. So I'm going to ask both of you, how can we utilize the MPOs to reach out to businesses in the area to promote telework? Chair Russell talked about telework has only increased by 1% or 2% within the past few years. So is there any way for the MPOs to do a reach out effort? Do you have a list of businesses, large employers that we can talk with to start the ball rolling there? That's it.
Delegate Krim, I will say for I know the Frederick County Chamber of Commerce and other chambers of commerce are probably an ideal way to reach out to some of these businesses. We do have various contacts there.
And I'm going to echo what.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm going to echo what you just said, is that I know, especially even for our jurisdiction, working with our chambers of commerce have been, and our economic development, the major means of working with our business community. I do think there is a role for the MPO in this, as far as getting the word out amongst our jurisdictions to say, hey, let's work with our chambers, let's work with our economic development to see what we can do for telecommuting.
Conti, did you want to elaborate on what I had said?
No, I was just going to add, thank you, Ms. Kelly, and thank you, Mr. Chair, and the members of the subcommittee. Within the Transportation Planning Board and Commuter Connections particularly, there is a specific program. There are two programs, actually. One explicitly focused on growing teleworking, and we've been doing that since about 1995. There's another program called Outreach to Employers. This is where we reach out to employers within our capital region and ask them how we can help them improve alternate modes of commute, including teleworking. So we do have a database, and we have people within each of the jurisdictions whose full-time job it is to go meet with these employers. So we have their information, we have their database. Most importantly, we have a working relationship with them. So, but they are already doing all of these things. What is important is to reach out to the other sectors. And that is where I agree with both chairs, Chambers of Commerce, Greater Washington Partnership, Secretary Slater talked about working with them, the Greater Washington Board of Trade. All of those are venues to reach out to those private sector employers for whom teleworking is an option, but who are not currently, who don't have an extensive or a regular telework program.
I would add that for the Baltimore region, there is a network, and I know in the Washington region, there is a network of employees that provide this, as has been mentioned, and provide this kind of service. We have the Greater Baltimore Committee that also can help us in spreading the word. The folks that are out in the local government offices doing this work do have a good basis and database to reach out to folks. So we are happy to continue that. We need to probably accelerate that given where we are and what we've heard through this conversation today.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions from my colleagues, so I think you wore us all out. But it was a great discussion with all three panels, and another thank you to Vice Chair Krim for really egging us on to hold this briefing. I will echo something my colleague Delegate Beitzel said, which is that teleworking could have a huge detrimental impact on transportation trust fund revenue in the state of Maryland. And that's something to keep an eye on as well, and very relevant to the Appropriations Committee, because we really enjoy spending that money. So obviously more conversations to come, and thank you to all our guests as well as my colleagues, and we will all be in touch soon. And thanks to the staff for getting this together.